call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, Wednesday, October 22nd. If you'll rise, please. John, if you'll lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please. Here. Here. Okay, Sam McIntyre is in the audience, and I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Public comments? Oh, I'm sorry. Agenda review. Any changes?
No changes.
Okay. Public comments. Anybody want to make any comments on GMA issues? Okay. Board member comments. It's windy, dry, and hot. The aquifer is going, yeah, nice. He sees his pump charges go, yeah. Enough of that. If security will remove Mr. Ranio from the proceeding. Very good. Does everybody know that our own Jeff Pratt is now Director of Public Works for the county? When he told me 3 days ago, whenever it was, I said, okay, do we have to refer to you as Cheese, Big Cheese, or the Super Cheese guy? And he said, Jeff is fine, so it'll be Super Cheese Jeff. There we go.
You all know that Zone 2 is Zone. Jeff says he's going to do things differently.
Anyway, congratulations, and my compliments to the county for selecting you. They chose correctly. Here's Dave, so show him on the agenda as well. Any other board member comments? Okay, we have a consent agenda. Any? Yes, ma'am. Okay.
I guess it'd help if I turned on the mic. I'm not sure why we do it, but we list, generally speaking, consent items twice, and then we have it in the minutes twice, and maybe we just need to have them once. But under item G, consent agenda, it says that a motion was made on the first one, and it doesn't mention that it passed. Then when you get it down to the second one under consent items, approval of minutes, it says it passed. It's on page 2, item G, and then consent 1 and consent 2. They're kind of repetitive.
Okay. You understand the administrative issue there? You want to clean that up, and then we'll bring the minutes back to the next meeting in December. We'll approve it, or are you okay with an approval with those changes?
I am, except that there's a few more.
Oh, okay.
On the next page, item 7, it says a motion was made and seconded, but it doesn't say if it was passed or failed or what, or if the chair so ordered. And item 8, the same.
Okay.
And then under 12, we recessed into closed session. It says under the closed session part that the announcement was made, but actually I believe that that part should be moved down into 13 where we reconvened. After we reconvened, the attorney made the announcement. It's just a procedure thing.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Why don't you do this, Jeff? Change those items. Just review it and change them as appropriate. Bring it back to the next meeting for approval. Okay? We'll do that.
That's fine.
All right, very good. Anything else? So let's go right to action items number 2. Okay, that's done. Let's go to number 3. Anybody that spends 2 weeks in Cabo, we're just going to go through it quickly. So, Tammy, Dan Nauman just came in too as an alternate. Item number 2.
That's item 2.
Yeah.
That's actually item 3. But I'll be presenting this item. As you know, Chair Mulhart, Garrett Hubner, for the record, Watershed Protection District. As you know, at the last board meeting, your board passed a resolution honoring Miss Dana Weishart, and Dana was unavailable at that time. Your board expressed
Where was she?
I will let her answer that.
he asked
herself.
innocently.
So we are here today to properly honor her in person, and with that, I'll step back. We do have the resolution. We do have a plaque. I need to actually put it in there, but we have that for her today, and it's at your board's pleasure how you want to proceed with
All
this
right.
particular item.
Dana, if you'll come forward here, if I may. Since I have the microphone here, I'll read it, and then we'll say the...
Guess I'll do the formal.
Whereas United Water Conservation District General Manager Dana Weishart has worked for many years promoting water issues in the state and local levels while assisting and supporting the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, and whereas Ms. Weishart used her considerable experience and knowledge of politics, parliamentary procedures, and water management acumen to accomplish the many tasks required of a water industry leader, and whereas Dana has been a key player and participant in crafting the many rules, regulations, policies, and proceedings associated with regulating groundwater, pricing water, ensuring water deliveries, or promoting cooperation amongst the many water factions, and whereas during her tenure, Dana has significantly contributed to the success and accomplishments of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency in so many public and volunteer ways that added to the successful operation of the agency, especially in relation to ordinance development, effective resolutions, and water management policies, that upon her retirement from public spotlight, we now decree and confer special recognition upon her by officially declaring the following, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency take great pleasure in thanking and publicly honoring Ms. Dana Weishart for her dedicated, distinguished, and honorable service to the water industry within Ventura County, especially to this agency, and in wishing her well in whatever plans and adventures wait to her in retirement. She is now authorized to take as many vacations. No, I'm sorry, that was I was just thinking out loud. I've said it to you before. I've said it to other members. I think one of the reasons we're successful in this county is we all understand the dilemmas that we're under. And there are a number of individuals and entities that if they did not agree, we could be in one hell of a litigation war. And people have used common sense and judgment, and I think we've worked through that. United and the cities and PV and all of the purveyors have worked through the logic, and a lot of that success has been your willingness to go out and make friends and get people to bridge gaps and take off their combat hat and put on their vacation hat. And we have peace. We have water peace. I think we're one of the few counties that has water peace. When I saw you here a few minutes ago as I walked in, having received some emails from Jeff going, oh my God, I need to tell Dana about this, but I spared you the details. So yes, there are still problems out there. They're not easy. They're going to get bigger. And but the work that you've done has been immense, and I am personally in deep gratitude for keeping the peace, and I want to thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank, Dana Weishart, retired. I would like to thank your board and your staff and everybody out here who comes here and works together to make those issues that we are always going to have, make them, smooth them out, do the best we can to get a consensus on how to handle them. And this board has been just one of the best places to get that done. And it's been really a privilege to work with you and for you, and with you and for you. Just keep on doing what you're doing because you're doing the right thing. Director Mulhart, you are entirely correct. This is one of the rare counties where you can say, yeah, we've got problems, but we are going to work together. And it's thanks to you.
No, it's thanks to you. Do we have a camera?
Right there.
Okay. Dana, would you come up here? And we'll get all the board members. We'll do it unless everybody wants to go down there. What do you guys like to do? Let's go there.
Well, let me come up there.
Come on. Let's go.
I want to come up
We can do
there.
it for the flag.
Do it in front of the county seal.
There you go.
Although we're a state agency, we'll do it in front of the county seal. I knew you would say that.
That's good.
We dress especially for you.
We're in vacation clothes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you got here in time to sign this.
I didn't get the dress memo.
There you go.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Good.
Did it flash? Did it do everything? No. Thanks.
Let's
I'll
get
have
it.
that mounted.
I'm leaving. Yes, I'm going now.
Have fun in retirement.
I'm heading down to see my brother.
Good, good.
Thank you. Oh, no. Not real. You never know what they might be genetically.
Okay, Dana, did you want to speak on this other item, adjusting groundwater surcharges, or are you just going to? Okay, all right. Okay, let's move on to the next item. Is this item 4, or it's listed as 3? You guys changed the numbering on me, so I'm behind schedule again. Story of my life.
Should be item 3.
Okay, item 3, please.
Item 3. Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District, presenting item number 3, proposed resolution 2008-9, a resolution adjusting the groundwater surcharge rate pursuant to our ordinance 8.1. Be nice if this was in front. There we go. Okay. All right, I have a short presentation for you today, starting with the background. As several of you might recall, in October of 1998, the GMA board adopted Resolution 98-02, setting the surcharge at $725 per acre foot for well operators of groundwater who pumped above their established allocation. That surcharge became effective January 1st of the following year in 1999 and has remained unchanged since then, so essentially 10 years. At that time, the proposed surcharge rate was based upon a combination of annexation costs, connection fees, capital facility charges, and the cost of imported water. Increasingly, it's been clear to us that the current GMA surcharge of $725 no longer provides an effective economic deterrent or disincentive of overpumping of groundwater. Our review of the database and our data within it shows several of the operators within the jurisdiction of the GMA are in surcharge mode and on a regular basis exceed their historical allocation, potentially subjecting them to the surcharge. So we looked at options for a surcharge adjustment. One of the rates that we've looked at is the Cayugas Municipal Water District, their Tier 2 rate, and I'll explain that in the next slide. That's set each year in January and regularly adjusted every year. It's currently at $755 per acre foot. The Tier 2 rates are set to recover the cost to import potable water from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. The tier designation is employed by both MWD and Cayugas to distinguish between the cost of maintaining a reliable supply, Tier 1, and the cost of developing additional supplies above historical deliveries, Tier 2, which I referenced earlier. Tier 2 rates are the most applicable and most appropriate rate to apply per our ordinance, section 5.8.1.1 listed. And I'll just read it very quickly. The cost to import potable water from Metropolitan Water District of Southern California or other equivalent water sources that can or do provide non-native water within the agency's jurisdiction. Fortunately, your ordinance provides considerable flexibility in translating the cost of imported water into the GMA's extraction surcharge. Section 5.8.2, the surcharge could be structured, tiered, or varied between the basins and aquifers. And Section 5.83 allows that the costs be sufficiently high to discourage extraction of groundwater in excess of the approved allocation when that extraction will adversely affect achieving safe yield of any basin within the agency. I want to emphasize this point, and you can see that I've underlined it. Payment of the surcharge only reflective of Tier 2 rates will not provide a sufficient deterrent or disincentive to overpumping. We believe, and several of the stakeholders that I've talked to, that incremental supplemental cost be added to this Tier 2 rate to discourage the casual payment of the surcharge as a no-net cost alternative to purchasing imported water from Cayugas or other water purveyors. In other words, we don't want folks just to pay the surcharge as in lieu of them not being able to obtain additional supplies or imported water. On this table, I've put a number of options for your consideration, essentially two options, one with and these are options to add to the surcharge, the Tier 2 rate. So if you look across here, option 1 is in $100 increments. So 100, 200, 500. You add that to the 755, and that gets you a total surcharge rate. And you can read that across that line. Option 2 is a percent increment of the Tier 2 rate, set at 25, 50, 100, or 200% of that particular rate. The translation calculated, you see that value, you add that to the 755, and you get the total surcharge rate with the percent increments. And we can come back to that if you have questions. So some of the conclusions that we've reached: the cost and reliability of imported water continues to rise and remain uncertain as to its future availability. The agency's groundwater extraction surcharge should not be considered as a source of revenue to this agency. Again, this is another point I want to emphasize. You can see I've underlined it, but rather a disincentive to groundwater overpumping. We're not trying to collect revenue. We're trying to discourage overpumping. The current surcharge is becoming less and less effective as an economic deterrent to overpumping, as I mentioned earlier. Staff believes 25% supplement, calculated at $189, plus the Tier 2 rate of $755 for a total surcharge rate of $945 should be sufficient at this time. The supplemental incremental cost is necessary in the event of supply of imported water is limited or restricted. The agency's surcharge should be revisited and possibly revised on an annual basis to take into account future MWD and Cayugas Tier 2 rate increases. We know next year there will be a 14% rate increase, and the following year we've heard that as much as 21% is what MWD is looking to increase their water rates. So with that, we've put together a resolution for your consideration today and possible adoption. That's Resolution 2008-9. Excuse me. Approving the adjusted groundwater surcharge rate effective January 1st of next year. Give folks time to become accustomed to it and give them a little bit of leeway. That surcharge rate is tied to Cayugas' Tier 2 rate plus a supplemental 50% of that Tier 2 rate for the total of $945 I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, John.
Can you just go through the points of why this new rate, $944, is it? Why that's going to be a disincentive?
Part of that, and it is a difficult amount. You know, I surveyed some of the water districts to find out our own county waterworks district. They indicated that $900 would be effective. It's a balancing act in the fact you want to create that disincentive, yet if there are small municipals or operators that are close to the surcharge, you don't want to create too much of a hardship. Set it too high and it's perhaps too much, too low and it's not a disincentive. Balancing.
What is the current, first of all, I like the analysis that you've gone through. I would, when it comes time to actually set the number, I think we ought to just pick a number and not, have a tier 2 plus a percentage or whatever. I read the previous ordinance that we passed back in '98, I think, and we just said it's a flat $725. So, $955 or whatever the number is, we just do it that way. That'd be my choice. Second of all, according to the ordinance, it says that we will, shall be based upon, one, the cost to import potable water from Met or other equivalent water source. Assume you went to $955, you had $200 or $944, whatever we agree on. Is that the current cost of water? It does not reflect the 14% increase that we're going to have when this thing becomes effective. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if you add a 14% to the 944, even take District 19, which I saw in here at 900, plus 14%, 10 is 90, half again, so you're at 1,050. That's where they're going to go come essentially the first of 09. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
So if we stop at the 944, we give people enough notice so that they know it's coming, we're automatically behind what we've said what we're going to do, and we're always playing catch up.
to a certain degree, yes, for the fact that Cayugas doesn't set their rates until January 1st of the following year. They look at that.
And when does it become effective?
I
If they set them January 1 of 09, when are they effective?
don't have that answer.
Bob? That day. So if we set 944, some number there, and that does not reflect, that reflects the current cost today, but we're not making it effective until January. Come January, Cayugas is going to reset their rates by some factor, at least 10%, assuming we discount their 14, say 10%, that puts them pretty close to $1,000. So my question then is, and this is for everybody, should we set the number at $1,000, given the fact that it'll coincide with what Med is doing and get us on schedule and not playing catch up? That's the question.
I think we have to answer that, not him.
Well, I know. That's a question for you, and it's a
I
question
would
for the
certainly
audience.
be amenable to that.
Yeah, it's a question to the audience. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Solomon, General Manager for United Water Conservation, replacing AARP member Dana Weishart. I thought she signed in. That's how I can get away with it. I've been working with Steve Bachman quite a bit on this issue, and from United's standpoint, at least from the staff standpoint, we'd like to see the number more between like 1,200 and 1,500. That's what we're seeing as far as replacement cost of water. We'd also recommend, and so go to that second column that Gerhard had out there. You can round it off to 1,150, but 1,200 to 1,500 seems to be the replacement cost of the water. Because remember, first of all, the reliability from the State Water Project is becoming questionable. So we think it should be more of a detriment to try to overpump if you went to 1,200 to 1,500, number one. And number two, we'd also like to request that the board consider what's happening with that money. The idea that money should be going toward finding replacement water to replace what's been pumped out. What's happening with that water? We'd like some consideration being given to that. And part of my thinking, too, is we look at those GMA projects that are in the GMA management plan. How do we start funding some of those and make some of those projects happen so we can create new water, replacement water? So I would recommend at least 1,200 up to 1,500 to make the point.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any? Sam? You've heard 12 to 1,500. Staff is at 944. And
You know, I can't refuse the opportunity.
there you go. I'm going to get Rob up here, so just hold on. I'm not done yet.
Sam McIntyre, Burwood Water. I believe you're having a meeting this Friday regarding looking into the future of what the GMA will be doing as far as the Fox Canyon, what the water movement will be, what type of farming will be going on and everything. And I would suggest if the 1,200 bothers me a little bit because I'm not quite sure that the whole board understands the complications and the changes that are going to be made in the Las Posas Valley as far as pumping with the water rate increases, because We're in the year 2010, we're looking at well over 1,100 gallons, $1,100 an acre foot with lift charges and everything. And that's out of the realm of lemons and avocados. And we'll have to go to more specialized crops. So maybe you should wait until after your meeting and you reviewed what's going to happen with the GMA as far as the Fox Canyon. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
If I could
Okay,
ask Sam a
Director.
question.
How many acres, Sam, if you will, maybe I'm posing the question wrong. How many acres of ag will use this high-cost water?
I wish I had that information for you right now. Reddy Bacala is helping me. We should have that information tomorrow afternoon when we do the District 19 Water Advisory Committee. And I would be more than happy to get that to you after that.
Okay, that would be good. And then on the municipal, the smaller water districts, like those in El Rio, for example, and other places, how many districts are affected? Anyone say?
Frank Borman-Schenkel, Real Plaza Water Company, one of the El Rio companies. Currently, they're bordering on being in the red. In fact, they are a little bit in the red at this point in time. And if you look at, I forget what the exact numbers are, but the percent increase in rates is like, for something like this, would be like another 15% increase in rates to cover the cost of these surcharges if they had to pay them. Now, this particular company, just recently I was able to get the Public Utilities Commission to approve a tiered rate structure, and it appears that that is helping at this point in time, but unless there is, some other way there to assist them, that would be a substantial impact for them. But it's one of those things. But supposedly, the Real Plaza would qualify for water out of the TAP program, which potentially is going to be less than the surcharge amount. So as long as there are some other avenues there that you can spin off into, that would be good, because they don't have another source of water. They're going to have to pump, and if the tiered rate structure doesn't work, their rates are going to have to go up fairly dramatically, and they're right now probably on the average between $40 and $50 a month for some fairly low income.
Okay, but Frank, if you're saying right now they're not in the surcharge, they're just barely getting into it. So if they get into the surcharge, I would think that if all their water was subject to surcharge, your 15% increase in their rate would probably be a true statement. I find it hard to believe that if they just get into the surcharge, that is, I would assume, a relatively small percentage of their total cost.
Another 5%.
Okay.
But if your tiered water rate structure works as it did in our city, do you suppose that your usage will go down?
I'm not seeing any real positive signs on that. Those rates went into effect in October of last year, and it turned out for several months there it continued the same. It took a dip, and I haven't quite figured out if all that is weather or whether or not they
The
have,
usage went down in the summer?
like in May and June. And then
Which
it went
wouldn't
up.
normally be the time it would go down, would it?
We had a really cool May.
Yeah,
weather-wise.
that's true. So, I mean, if you're looking at historical, months and stuff, some of those numbers didn't really make sense this first time. So, don't really know whether or not it's going to have an impact there, because, essentially what you're up against is a situation where you have multiple families in a good majority of those homes, and those that don't have multiple families they're owned by those people who bought those back in the early 50s, so they're retired people. So You know, but I mean, if there could be another avenue such as the TAP program to assist in that area to keep from paying those, I mean, that's part of the whole game that we're, you know, playing here. I mean, there ought to be options and stuff rather than, you know, actually having to pay the surcharge, because there really isn't any water or any other source of water, you know, other than they're you know, an overlying user in the forebay that, you know, in a sense, that have been, you know, prescripted against with the other programs and stuff that actually have been implemented. And you know, I really think there is some concern that, you know, like these smaller companies in the forebay, I mean, we're talking, you know, like probably 25 acre-feet a year that we're going to be into, you know, the surcharge. That, you know, you've got all these other new programs coming in, the Sedequate Wellfield, additional pumping for the M&I and the TAP program coming in. It's extra demand in the forebay, and there has been, you know, the priorities, you know, have been, you know, exerted by these little companies. In other words, they have not been able to, you know, what they normally would have as far as an overlying user is being taken up by these new programs, and they haven't been given any sort of priority in that process. So,
May I just ask a question?
Yeah.
How long ago were the users in the water district that you mentioned on a flat rate?
they've always had metered water, so it was flat rate.
They've always had metered water.
It's always been a metered company for at least 25 years.
Okay. All right.
So, you know, there is some hardships going to be.
If your client base stayed within their first tier, so they didn't experience any surcharge themselves, can you live within your allocation, or are you going to draw from supplemental water just to meet your basic first tier?
Right now, I think they're over slightly. In the last couple of years, they've accumulated some overage, and what I have been able to do is to do some transfers from another company that's right next door. It's like, you know, you have like 4 or 5 of these between the spreading basins and the freeway, and I have done a transfer from another company to keep from actually paying the surcharges to this point in time. So they have gone over, and we've been able to do those transfers to this point in time. But the impact is fairly substantial, and it was just last October when we had a 35% increase in rates just to cover, you know, the pumping fees and power costs and that sort of thing that have accumulated. It had been a number of years since the company had a general rate case.
Do they anticipate increasing their rates every year?
The California Public Utilities Commission allows a cost of living increase on an annual basis. This last year it was 4.1%, which is pretty good. Generally it's 2 to 3% per year, but you know, over and above that, you know,
That wasn't my question. You said it had been a number of years since there had been an increase. Do you anticipate using the cost of living increase every year, or letting it build up a while before it's increased again?
I intend to use the cost of living increases. Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks, Frank. Anybody else on any of this? Okay. My sense that I think we need to make an adjustment to this rate. It's been 10 years since the last time we adjusted it, and we put it in place as a disincentive to overpumping. It appears that it's losing that kind of power. And although we have some entities that are small that are impacted, I think there may be some programs we can help them work around or work with them. I'm frankly more concerned about the large entities that have the kind of financial power to pay the money in lieu of and just grow. And so I think we need to make an adjustment. This adjustment is effective January 1 of 09. I think we ought to deal with it today and not in December, because we're normally dark in November. And it is a surcharge, and since we have not made an adjustment in a while, I'm not opposed to making some adjustment now and laying the foundation that we may have to make an adjustment the following year to eventually catch up with Kiegas. Because if that's what the real cost of imported water is, and we've elected that this is a disincentive to using groundwater as a way of solving the problem, I would propose that either we go to the flat 955 or the 944, however they came up with the number. Either one of those numbers I think works. Make it effective January 1, 09, and then put this back on the agenda for the middle of the year so that we can deal with it in the middle of next year and give people enough notice that we're going to adjust it again, and we may have to make another adjustment depending upon what that cost is based on United's input and Kiegas' input, but I think we need to move the number.
For discussion purposes, I'll put it on at 944
Okay, so we have
as a motion.
that's a motion to adjust to 944.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question of Jeff? If we were to, for the homeowners where you have multiple families living in single residence and stuff, is it within this agency's ability to maybe contribute to maybe a toilet upgrade program? I doubt some of those people in the non-incorporated areas have had one of those programs yet, have they?
I don't see why not, but I would ask Al Bawada that question.
Okay, before we answer that question, let's be careful of what we just suggested here.
Yeah.
Because the city of Oxnard has exactly the same problem. Parts of Camarillo, I would assume, people have doubled up and tripled up on some of the homes.
But
I understand that.
Oxnard and Camarillo through Metropolitan have participated in the switching out of toilet
Right.
programs.
Okay, so
I
you might-
brought this to the group's attention once before, but in my own experience, I went from 3.5 toilets to Totos, which is the Japanese toilet made in Georgia, and I literally cut my water use in half.
But some of those houses
So-
from the 50s still have 6-gallon.
Yeah, and so I think, if you go from a 6 to a 1.4, that's a big move. I measured, if you rapidly flush a Toto, it's a 1.2. If you hesitate, it's a 1.6. And if you hold the lever, it's a 2.4. So those of you who are into...
Doc, do we have too much time on our hands? Is that what you're
Too
saying?
much information.
Doc, there are a lot of dogs and cats, I'm sure, in this audience that would love your time. So-
Well, my proposal really would hinge more, I like simple numbers. If we could participate in such a program, I would rather suggest we go to a $1,000 base and that we use those monies to try to do something that's a water conservation program. That would be where I'd go.
I think that your idea is excellent, and it may be that we do it as a process. We go to some number, and then when we come back in the middle of next year, which would be my proposal, to adjust it again, that gives staff and legal a chance to determine how we would set up, if possible, a grant program and where that funding would come from and how we could put that money to use.
It's just that where you have 2 or 3 families and one residence and only one latrine, you get a lot of mileage out of that one latrine.
So I'm hearing 945, I'm hearing Mike suggesting 1,000, and we have...
Well, he suggested 1,000 on the condition that we do some kind of a rebate program, so maybe what we need to do, although we're discussing, but we don't have a second yet.
Well, I'm not sure we could agree to a rebate program. We don't know the legalities
That's
of it.
what I'm saying, so maybe we need to go with the 944, and then next year, when they come back with a number, look at if they are able to have a toilet switch out
Would you
program.
be okay with that?
If that's the condition, I would second your motion so that we can get on with it.
Okay. So your original motion was 945?
944, which is the number right
Okay,
here.
944. So your motion is 944. I have a second on that. Dave, any discussion on that?
I'm in agreement with you in terms of, I don't think we ought to tie it to Kiegas's rate, particularly the way this is worded. It's kind of a moving target, the rate, and I don't like that. I don't think that's fair for pumpers in the agency. They need to know what to count on, and we can revisit it. So what you said makes a lot of sense, tying that 944 number with the anticipated Collagus increase. We've been told it's 14%, but I guess that's not for sure either. Until we see it, we don't really know what it is. So maybe the prudent approach is 944,
Okay.
a flat rate.
Okay.
You know, we do have to make an adjustment, that's for sure, to provide that disincentive. That one of the issues that we face with some of the water districts like this one is that we're putting in the sewer system, and of course, people who historically don't pay anything will be paying, hopefully, keep it down to like $50 a month for their sewer service. So that's totally a new fee for them. So, but we do have to make an adjustment. I just want to bring that to the attention. This particular water district has about 500 and some residential users, so, and they're all in this new sewer effort. So their costs are going to go up dramatically. But I still support making an adjustment.
Okay.
And I think we need to deal with a conserving program, a conservation program.
Okay. Anybody in the audience, you're hearing now the number of 944. We'll probably look at this issue again in the middle of next year. We'll ask staff and council to look at how we could set up, if it's feasible, and where the funding would come from for some kind of grant program. And you may have to word it such that if it's not offered by some other agency, so we're not all across the board. If Met is doing it for Oxnard and Camarillo and Ventura, that kind of takes them off the table. So it's people that aren't eligible for any other program. Maybe how that would be structured, I don't know. You'd have to think about it. But so the plan would be to come back at the middle of next year, adjust the rate if necessary, look at what Kiegas's rates are, look at what United's input is, and come up with a new number if necessary. But for now, beginning the first of the year, the rate would be 944. That's what we're pushing towards, right?
Why not just make it 950? Nice round number.
Okay. Charlotte, if I may interrupt, I'm hearing from people that write checks, and they think a simpler number of 950. It's easier to write a check for 950.
Okay, 950's fine.
Okay.
I'll revise the motion if that's okay with the second.
You
I'll
okay?
second the revision.
All right, 950 is the number with looking at, and this is, the part of the motion is not looking again next year, but that'll be the direction to staff. Anybody in the audience have problems with this?
It's a totally different way of looking at writing a check.
Yeah.
Right now, whose idea was it?
And Dan writes checks. I'll go with Dan. John's going to have to write. John Grether's back there. He's going to have to write checks too. John's okay with it, I can tell. Can we have a roll call on that, please?
Excuse me,
Oh, wait.
Chair Mulhart, I just had a question. Director Borchard mentioned, I think, drafting the resolution so that it specifies the surcharge rather than tying it to the Cayugas rate. So I believe the existing resolution probably has the language that the board desires with just the rate change.
Right, we would propose, based on what your motion, that the resolution be modified to be the number, the 950, versus being tied to Cayugas's Tier 2 rate plus the percentage.
Could I suggest that it say, now therefore it is hereby resolved in order that a groundwater extraction surcharge rate be fixed at $950.
Yes.
There we go. Period.
That was part of my motion.
Okay. Al, you okay with that? Okay. All right. Can we have a roll call? Mike seconded. Okay, a roll call on that, please.
Director Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Flynn?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Butcher?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good job. All right. The next item is an informational item. Dave, you want to speak to that?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. David Pinaro, agency hydrologist. I just wanted to give you a quick update on what's been going on with the meter program. We could pull some slides up here. There we go. I specifically chose this photo because I wanted to point out, I didn't do that. Point out that this is a really good installation as far as being the right amount of straight pipe in front of the meter and the right amount after the meter, so you don't have any turbulence going through the meter. This looks like a flange meter, but it's a saddle meter sitting on top of a pipe section that was inserted right there. Originally, this program was set up as 3 zones, where we would do Zone 1 first. About 220 letters went out to well owners in that area, and then before we went to Zone 2 and 3 in the following years, we decided to combine those together. So the mailings for Zone 1 went out in 2007, and the mailings for both Zones 2 and 3 went out in 2008. Here's how we summarize that. 220 wells in Zone 1 received notice of test letters early spring of 07. 158 of those wells were not tested, and second notice letters went out to those folks. Zones 2 and 3 was 730 wells combined, and they received notices in mid-08. That's a total of 950 wells have been notified so far. And this is kind of how it shapes up, if you can see this graph here. The most important part of this is the pink area. We still have 115 people as of 2 weeks ago when I made this that have not complied with our request to have their meters checked. So I'm assuming some of them are still in the process. They're trying to get that done. Some of them replaced for new meters at 19 right there. Some reported their well was destroyed. We did have a number that were calibrated and done properly. The backup wells and domestic wells that were reported, they do not require meters, so they didn't have to test anything. Same thing for the 2008 mailing, just a bigger pool of people. Almost 500 wells still non-reported. And that period ends next week, or actually the first week in November. So they will get another 60-day notice, all these people in the pink area that have not complied. And that will start around mid-November and end about mid-January, and at that point everybody will be considered non-compliant. So if they haven't reported, they will receive possible penalties, or they could be subject to those penalties, and that would include twice the normal pumping fee, so it would be $8 an acre foot instead of $4. We can also do other things if we want to, perhaps, if your board decides to take further action. But as of January 09, we'll come back to you and probably give you another report, and we'll discuss what kind of compliance we have to date and any kind of penalty actions you want to take at that time. So
I have a question.
just a quick update on what's going on with that.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So what you're looking at is extending, sending out another notice and extending everything for 60 days, but then the people in Zone 1 would have had an extra year to comply over Zones 2 and 3 that were sent out later. Is that right?
You're correct. Yeah, actually, this will be the second 60-day notice will be actually a third notice for the Zone 1 folks. So they've kind of gotten a little extra because they were the first ones out of the gate, if you will, and kind of a new program here, so we're trying to be a little bit lenient in that respect.
Should the Zone 1 folks get a notice of penalty action, and rather than another 60 days, because they actually have had that much time to comply?
Well, because we kind of changed the program in midstream, I could leave that up to your board. We don't want to make that decision.
Well,
as staff.
the only thing we changed in midstream was we looped the other 2 zones in. We didn't change anything for Zone 1.
Yeah. Well, technically, you're right.
Chair Molhart, that's correct. Essentially, what we did when we reinitiated the program or came before you was to capture everybody else and put them on the same level playing field.
And these letters of notice will go out in November.
Right.
Assuming that you were going to send out a letter of non-compliance and now they're into the penalty phase, what will you actually say in that penalty letter?
Well, we've drafted up a few ideas, but nothing solid yet.
The ideas range from public scolding to vacation cruises. I mean, what's the range here?
Well, unfortunately, the resolution is
it could be a good deal. You know,
Yeah.
I get out of town here.
It's non-specific in some ways, so
I don't want them on my airplane
Yeah.
mad, but, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All
I have enough
states-
problem dealing with passengers without irate pumpers on my airplane, so.
This is basically, wrong one there. This is basically exact language from that resolution, and it just says, other penalties and/or liens not to exceed maximums described in Ordinance 8.
Okay, what is,
I mean, that, you have the option of going $500 a day, $1,000 a day, as per Chapter 8.
okay,
The ordinance.
here's the dilemma, and I think Charlotte was alluding to it. If you give Zone 1 folks essentially a total year in which to get in compliance, why aren't we doing that for Zone 2 and 3 out, and we'll never get this,
question, yeah.
right? So maybe you can send to Zone 2 and 3 their first and only 60-day extension, because I think that's how it's written, then they go into penalty.
Right.
The people in Zone 1, they've already had 2 60-day extensions, or even more than that. Maybe their letter needs to be a different letter. And their letter needs to say, effective this date per the ordinance, you're now being levied these charges, and you have until this date to get it done, 30 days, I don't know.
It certainly can do
And
that.
then if we're going to do this, let's do it. I
Sure.
mean, part of the,
Zone 1 folks did get a second notice already, and we had a lot of good compliance on that second round, so it was pretty effective. The second notice letter got them thinking about it.
The second
we've
notice
had a lot
letter
of
said
calls.
you have to have it done by a certain date.
Yes, and we've had a lot of
It
calls in
seems
the last
to
couple
me
of
that
weeks.
if we get into the third letter of saying you've only got to a certain date, you're like a mother saying, you better mind or else, and then the next time you say, you better mind or else, and the kids say, oh, man, I don't have to mind her, I get an or else. Where's the wooden spoon? You know? That's
Point well taken.
wooden spoon,
Thank you.
please.
what I said, wooden spoon.
Yes, I heard that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mike.
I know maybe your intercom system at high altitude doesn't get the same feedback I do, but this has not been real simple for everybody, and it would seem to me the Group 1 has had a time period where the impact on the providers was much less. They had access to SoCalEd's team without being overwhelmed as they currently are. And at least I've been getting people telling me the level of difficulty they're having, not necessarily always getting somebody, but it's not always easy to get the meter read. And lastly, it's not always easy to get the recheck. And I brought that to staff's attention last month. And I think that if the Group 1 group, if our enforcement was aggressive against them in the beginning, that would be useful use of your time. And then you could see in a while how you get there. But to put the second and third group all of a sudden in the same situation, they've been disadvantaged by the fact there's so many of them. And, Department of Motor Vehicles does this kind of things periodically, and I would like to see us not be one of them, that we just get very arbitrary and capricious. Thank you.
But you're not suggesting that a letter still go out to the ones in
No, I think
2 and
that
3.
the Group 1 might be
A different
something
letter.
a bit more aggressive, because their time period has kind of lapsed. But certainly Group 2 and 3, who are the last 900, should be given a bit longer, because I don't know if anybody here wants to come and speak to it, but I've been hearing that there are some issues, and certainly SoCalEd was pretty well overwhelmed. And then there have been some issue of correcting. Some of the meters are not so easy to fix.
But they still get a letter saying,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the way I read what you're saying is Zone 2 and Zone 3 would get the 60-day notice. Here's your first 60-day notice. Zone 1 has already gotten 2 of those 60-day notices, and maybe the emphasis on Zone 1 needs to be stronger than just another 60-day notice. My question is, what is that strength? What are we going to do? What are you guys going to send? What is your proposal? What does the ordinance allow us to do?
Up to $1,000 a day penalty. And we haven't really gotten to the specifics of what the next letter was going to say, but it was going to be very strongly worded. It wasn't going to be
Believe it or not, we looked at the stats, and only about a third of these wells have been checked by Edison. The other 2/3 were private vendors.
So the bulk of
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we're in a position to draft that letter, though I do think the sense that I'm getting is that that letter to Zone 1 individuals needs to be very strongly worded, and it needs to include what these penalties are going to be, and when, and the date certain that they're going to be assessed, and how you want to go through that process. Zone 2 and Zone 3 should not get that kind of letter. They should get the 60-day extension. But I think
In
if...
other words, as of Zone 1 now, as of November, the date, pick a date, the penalty will...
It may be that instead of a 60-day notice, this is the final notice effective January 1 or January 15th, or pick a date. The assessment will be for non-compliance for the first 100 days, $200 a day. I don't know. You know, as long as you're within the realm of what the ordinance allows you to do, we got to do something. I'm sensitive to what Mike is saying. But I think we need to put some teeth into at least Zone 1 to lay the foundation of what you're going to do in Zone 2 and 3. Otherwise, we're just running around in circles.
They'll provide a good example for Zone 2 and 3, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll definitely check with the agency council on that before we...
Absolutely. Whatever penalties that you put in place, they have to be in compliance with the ordinance. The ordinance says up to 1,000. You can come up with a tiered process. You can come up with a date certain. You can come up with some incentive. I don't think the agency's intent is to make money on this deal. I think the agency's intent is to get a valid number so that we can make the model for the groundwater work, and it's not working if we don't have valid numbers. And frankly, we're facing some entities that want to move into the county that are going to push us heavily on exactly how valid our numbers are. So this doesn't play to our ability to fight those issues if we don't know what those numbers are. We've got to get folks into compliance. That was what the whole intent was, and I think as I listened to the water committee, the meter committee over the years, the cities are doing this all the time, and to be fair across the board, that's why the ag folks, and I think we've been more than fair and reasonable in the process of moving it down track. Now we're just running up to repeating ourselves.
Definitely been effective, because I think we're going to see a lot of good numbers next year when they report with accurate meters.
Okay?
So we'll see some changes.
So the direction to staff, if you guys will agree, I'll say it again to make sure you're all in agreement. You change it where you want. The direction to staff is to send the letters out per the schedule they had. The Zone 1 folks will get a very strongly worded letter with date certains and financial penalties listed in that letter, as long as it's in compliance with the ordinance. Zone 2 and 3 will get the standard 60-day extension, and hopefully by word of mouth and others, people will see that that's their legacy if they don't come into compliance. You guys okay with that? Mm-hmm. Yes, Mike.
I was just wondering if Mr. Pratt might put his PE hat on for a minute. If you're having a meter that you're having difficulty repairing or adjusting or whatever, and you know that it's 8% or 4% or whatever, based on the Edison test or whomever else there might have been, could you not just do an adjustment factor on that? I mean, when you go to sea with your compass, or I guess when you go to air with your compass, you have a deviation factor and you apply that to your compass. You don't tell the world to rebuild the compass or where North Pole. You just use the deviation factor. Would that not accomplish the same purpose, and would that suit staff?
Oh, yeah, if that's a true analogy, absolutely. You can determine it's 8% off. And we've been working with people who need extensions or having those difficulties where we can verify them. And so, absolutely.
So if they got their first test and they knew they were 5% or 4% wrong, they could just add the deviation factor and get on down the road. Okay.
Okay. Let's listen to Bob.
Robert Aranio, Crestview Water Company, and also a member of the meter committee. The danger that you have with what your recommendation is that the test is a snapshot in time, and groundwater conditions are fluid. They change up and down. The 5% may not be accurate 1 month from now when the water table is different. That's why we didn't want to go with Edison power records, is because the water table moves flow rates change on what comes out of a well, and a meter's accuracy can change also as those flow rates change as that water table moves. So I would not myself encourage that to be used.
But using your example, if you recalibrate a meter in July, then by your theory, it would no longer be accurate in December, whether it's Edison or the meter on the wellhead. I don't see your analogy. They're going to move proportionally. If you put 2 meters in a row, 8 foot apart,
Yes, sir.
those two should travel uniformly.
Yes, sir.
And so if you have a piezo meter of Edison and 8 foot away you have the installed meter and there's a 5% deviance, I would think that 5% deviance would be a standard occurrence unless you get into maybe the temperature of water change, but I think core temperatures don't change that much.
The question is, why is it initially 5% off? Is it because of a mechanical problem in the meter, such as a worn bearing, or is it because of velocity changes as that water moves through the meter? If you're moving a slower or lower amount of water through a meter, and you have velocity changes that are causing that meter to run fast or slow, that will change as the volume changes.
So you're declaring anybody with a variable speed pump is going to have an inaccurate meter?
No, I'm not. I'm declaring that what is the cause of the meter to initially be inaccurate will affect it over different flow rates of the water going through it. It's not going to be 5% consistent. If it's a worn bearing, maybe. But if it's a worn bearing also, that thing's going to wobble on the spindle, and that could affect its accuracy. We need to find out why is it 5% off, or why is it 8% off, not simply allow an adjustment.
Well,
If we get several tests, some of the Edison tests have shown where they test at different speeds. If you test the pump at 200 gallons per minute, it's going to have a little bit different accuracy than at 500 gallons a minute or 1,000 gallons a minute.
to see anybody with a natural gas pump or a diesel pump, and you might run to 1,000 and you need a little more water, you speed it up to 17.5 or 1,800 or something. I mean, by that theory, that we need a meter for every RPM, and I just don't think that's a practical
Well,
answer.
I think maybe the argument is, if I listen to the discussion, is I think Robert's argument is that the meter variance is not necessarily linear over the flow of water.
Most of the tests I'm seeing aren't more than about 1.5%.
So if the meter at that given flow is within our tolerance criteria, the assumption we're making is we'll allow it to be linear over the flow. If it's outside of that number as a starting point, now let's say, and that starting point I think is 5%. If it's outside that 5%, we're willing to live with the fact that, okay, we're going to assume it's linear over the flow of the meter. If it's outside the 5%, say it's 10%, that margin is so high, that the variance is so high, that maybe there's not a willingness to allow that margin to vary over that linear flow. At least get it within the 5%, and we'll spot you the fact that we'll give you that percentage over the range of flow. And maybe that's what the argument is.
If I might, I was very careful to qualify my answer. I said, if it can be established that it's the true 5%, and we would give them a workout on that. We're aware of the various problems associated with the pumping, the engineering behind meters. So we would give them a workout, and if there was a 5% offset, we would have figured out what was causing that 5% offset, and we would grant the variance. But if we found it was variable, we probably wouldn't. So I qualified it just to make a
Well, I appreciate it. I just think that if we have, somebody who's trying and they have somewhat of an idea of how far they off while they're trying to get it fixed, we don't have to declare them criminal one. We can get it,
But we might declare them workout one. So, yeah.
But that wouldn't go on.
Two, but not criminal.
But that wouldn't go on forever. At some point, they're going to have to get it fixed.
Probably by buying a new meter would be the answer.
And the average cost of these meters is running around $1,000.
Okay.
They're not cheap.
All right. We have our we have a motion to change the number to 950 per Al's suggestion. We'll insert Charlotte's wording. Everybody.
I thought we did that.
Oh, we already did that.
We'll send a second notice.
My brain is fried. Okay, you understand how
The
we're going to...
minutes will reflect 2 minutes.
Yeah, there we go. Hey,
We do understand the concerns that you have,
I will defer to the senior cheese that's now in our...
we are taking a stronger position on zone 1.
Okay, all right. Anything else on the information items?
In your case over there on non-compliant towns, what percentage of folks are you communicating with? I mean, you have 50% of non-compliant trying to fix it up, or you have 50% not even talking to you? I'm just curious what the percentage. Because that's a huge, your pie chart, that's
Yeah.
50 plus.
You're using the,
On zone one.
yeah, roughly 52%, something like
So out
that.
of 52%, how many folks are calling to say we're working on it?
I would guesstimate about 5% have called me and said, I'm not going to be able to make it by the deadline. I've been trying, or I ordered a meter, it's going to take a couple months, or I've got a final medicine, it's 2 months away.
They're
Yeah.
not even responding.
Well, I wasn't too concerned. What I've been telling them is you'll probably get a second notice anyway, so it's not a big deal. But for for zone 1 there, the 2007 mailing, I'm hearing the board saying, maybe we shouldn't send that third notice. Really, is what they would be getting.
Okay. Yeah.
David, of the non-responders, you're 45% or whatever you're saying that is. Do you have a feel for whether those are all large wells, small wells, a mix? What is
I haven't looked at it, Dr. Kelly. I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
Okay. All right, the last set of items on, where have I put it? I'm sorry, I'm losing my brain, and my eyes are going bad at the same time. Okay, Executive Officer report. Flying without glasses, by the way, folks, it's not a good thing for me. I'm just passing that on to you. So, administrative reports. Anybody have anything that they want to ask questions about?
Move to receive and file.
Okay. As a motion and a second, I got that as a commercial, right? I'll give the plug.
One item just to highlight, there's a workshop.
Ah, that's the commercial. There we go.
So, just a reminder to your board, we had some difficult issues.
The Board of Supervisors conference room is downstairs. Oh, this is considered the conference room. Okay, it'll be here. The workshop will be here. And as I understand it, because it's listed as a workshop, board members can come, but we're not doing board work, but we can all be here if we want to.
That's correct, it's publicly noticed.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have anything else that they want to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay, folks. Hey, by the way, for the record, Rob Saperstein did not come up. I don't know how we were able to snake by that one. You could, if you want, say something. Hey, look, he won't even speak. He'll shake his head, and the record doesn't recognize shaking heads. No. Is there a closed session?
It's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda, yes. Oh, there is. We're going into closed session, and we'll re-adjourn afterwards. I'm sorry. All right. My page is there. All right. Hey, John, I need to talk to you real before we go into closed session.